Greetings, brothers and sisters. To all my relations in America, my relations in Canada, we're all relations wherever we come from. We're all one people. We're part of the human race. And as Canada and the United States, who come upon our shores 500 years ago, and without being offered a place to settle, without being offered the right to expropriate land and resources, but to build a home and to join us as a part of the human family in our territories that we have never relinquished for thousands and thousands of years. And in that time, many battles have been fought since the inception, since the time of connection between the indigenous populations of North America and our European relations. From the time of contact, Columbian contact, we have always opened our arms and we have always welcomed you in. And we've always said our home is your home. But when you saw the vastness and the richness of our soil and the crops that came from here and the gardens and the vegetations and the resources that we had, especially metallic resources in the name of gold and silver, when you saw these things, this had value to you. And these things were wanted so badly that they raised up colonial armies, and then they put a proposition to us. And the proposition basically was, you will either willfully allow us to settle here and to live here and to extrapolate these resources in our name and our control, or we will send our militaries, our cavalry against you. And after the first very wave, the waves of infestations of smallpox inside of blankets as gifts, as well as diseases we had never heard about since the time immemorial. 90% of our populations died on contact, just from disease contact. So I'm just giving this little historical background to say that during this time, not only did the European relations that came to these continents engage in warfare with the indigenous populations, thousands of indigenous nations, and millions of people slaughtered on a wave of genocide for the interest of control of land and resources. It's a historical fact, so we're not sitting here stepping on anybody's toes. We're telling the truth, because today, gathered here today, are 9/11 truthers. And if we're going to talk truth, we must talk truth about what truth is historically, where we started from, where we're at. And we try to do it in a time capsule to bring it quickly so that we can get to one point. During the time of conception and the times of the wars waged between Great Britain and France and Holland and other nations and Portugal, all fighting over control over our land and our resources. During that time, wars were fought, and then there was armistice. That was peaceful negotiations came down, people settled, everybody broke up and balkanized our nations, and everybody settled and made their claims and gave title, saying this belongs to us now. Then at the end of the war in the United States, there was a Declaration of Independence that was signed. And many people don't understand, don't realize that the first Constitution of the United States government was predicated on the writings of the Iroquois Confederacy. The very oldest constitution in North America is the Guyanagola, the Great Law. The whole concept of democratic process, the concept of the two-thirds majority vote came from the Great Law, the Guyanagola, our people, the Mohawk, the Iroquois Confederacy. The concept of the people's referendum came from the Guyanagola, which was brought to us, delivered to us by a great prophet and statesman by the name of Deganawida, who brought this to us in the 13th century, long before we even knew that there was a white race. Women's equality came from the Deganawida, came from the Great Law. All these tenets of true democratic process were taken and adopted and incorporated by Benjamin Franklin and the so-called founding fathers of the American Revolution. And as they brought this in, and they said, hey, we're going to build a constitution, we're going to write a constitution that protects us from the tyranny of great Britons, of kings and queens and feudalism, to keep us as a sovereign, independent people, and a constitution that validates our right to exist as a free, independent people. We will hold this as patriots, and we will defend this. And our Constitution will even write into the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, we have the right to defend ourselves against the rise of tyranny anywhere in this world. That the First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees us the right to say what we want to say, to speak truth to power anywhere, anytime, any place, and not be told. And not ever to be told throughout history to be watch what you say it and be careful who you say it to. You remember those words? And that happened on September the 11th, 1990 or 2001. We were told that by Mr. Ari Fleischer from the Bush administration. But not only were we told that, but we were told a pack of lies. And today, while the United States, and today, a couple days ago, while Canada celebrated independence, today I want to inject right from the onset that today, we as 9/11 truthers, we as those seeking truth about what really happened around 9/11, we must today declare our independence from the Federal Reserve System and the international banking cartels that are causing the problems that we are all living through here today. My beautiful wife, she keeps the door, a Cree from Manitoba. I met her in 1993. We have 4 children, Angela, Dylan, Rainbow, and Che. I have a history. I was involved in the 1971 Attica Rebellion. I was the only man convicted for being a ringleader during that time, falsely accused of killing a prison guard during that time. In that year, 1972, John Lennon wrote a song called Imagine. And in that, it was a song to imagine a world of peace. The very first time he performed that song was at a benefit concert to raise money for my trial at Attica. And he dedicated that song, him and Yoko, to me and the Attica brothers. You can go on Attica, John Lennon, Attica State is a song in one of the albums. I say that to say this. When I wrote, many people know here, historically know that when they retook Attica Prison, we stood up against the barbaric conditions that existed in the penal system in the United States. At that time, there was only 750,000 people only, so to speak, inside the U.S. prison systems. Today, there's 2.3 million prisoners in U.S. penal colonies. Back then, the prison colonies were run by avowed Ku Klux Klan members. The warden at Attica was the Grand Imperial Wizard of the local clan at Attica in that region. It was 100% white guards, white racist, and every one of them ran a regimentation of brutality and torture. And if you did not follow authoritarian structure, you were murdered, beaten to death on the spot. Your family was told you committed suicide in prisons, and many people were buried in unmarked graves. The conditions were rancid and horrid, and that whole history is told in this book. We rebelled for 5 days, and after holding 50 hostages as a card, as a trump card, we knew we were dead if we didn't. Hostages who said by their own admissions later that said, we understand how we felt because they had lived in similar conditions for 5 days. Back then they had the Rockefeller drug law. Nobody was getting out. Everybody was going to bail for one joint, going to jail for life. Some people are still sitting in there right now for a bag of weed. Nelson Rockefeller ordered New York State troopers to go in, and they committed a bloodbath and killed 43 people in cold blood, including 11 guards. They killed themselves. Not one guard was killed as a result of hostages, allegedly, or the inmates cutting their throats or castrating them, as they falsely told the press. So Nelson Rockefeller, eventually down the road, there were 60 of us that were indicted. Eventually down the road in the house with Nelson Rockefeller, who was then facing confirmation as the Vice President of the United States under Gerald Ford. Nelson Rockefeller ordered Anthony B. Simonetti, the head of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation in New York State, to suppress any evidence of murders committed by the New York State Police to be presented to the second grand jury. And subsequently, a guy by the name of Malcolm Bell, who was one of the prosecutors, defected from the AG's office and basically came out and wrote a 60-page document to the New York Times and said, hey, they're doing this, and I cannot be a part of this, because there were very brutal, torturous murders that were committed at Attica that were worse, 10 times worse than the atrocities and tortures that were taking place today in Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo Bay. And so I was on trial. William Kunstler was my lawyer, and my appeals lawyer was Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, who writes a blurb in the back here of this book. After they killed 43 people, when a commission was put together, and the commission found out later, after I was already, New York Times refused to release that report while I was on trial. They waited 60 days till after I was out, till after I was convicted on this bogus charge of killing his prison guard. And then after 60 days, then they released the report, and I waited 4 years with the threat of them attempting to kill me 7 times when I was in prison. They tried to murder me 7 times. They kept me in solitary confinement where I never saw the sun for 3 years straight. And they beat me viciously, and they tried to murder me on a number of accounts. So you ask me why I talk as straight and forward as I do. I'm telling you from experience. I'm telling you what the inside of the belly of the beast looks like. Finally, the commission recommended that all the indictments against the Attica brothers be dismissed, the pending indictments, and that the state troopers be given a blanket amnesty for the murders they committed. Not a near one of the state troopers ever went to court or ever was tried or ever penalized for the murders they committed at Attica, and that, in my case, I should be recommended for executive clemency. For the first time in the history of New York State, on the recommendation of a governor, of the seceding governor, Hugh Carey, for the first time when I went to the parole board denied me parole, predicated on the lobbying done by 2 state senators, Dale Volcker and Ralph Marino, threatening the head of the New York State Parole Board from releasing me, saying that if I was released, that he would not have his confirmation in the Senate for her $62,000 a year post. A black man by the name of Edward Hammock. For the first time in the history of New York, I was denied parole and given 2 more years. After that, I was finally released after international communities from around the world asked and demanded my release. Now I say I know this because I understand this. I understand the nature of Nelson Rockefeller and how he tried to suppress the murders that he ordered to be executed in Attica. And it leads me to another family member of the Rockefeller family. And that happens to be David Rockefeller, the head of the Trilateral Commission. I'm going to be talking about him and Nathan Rothschild today, because these are the 2 peoples that are the greatest empire builders in the world, and these are the people that we have to deal with, all trickled down to who we are today, right here, right now. One of the grandsons, or one of the nephews of Nelson Rockefeller, ironically, invited me, had seen a talk I gave on a talk called Above the Law, which in a video we discussed on how we stood off the Canadian government in 1995 in a standoff situation in a place called Gustafsen Lake, which is outside of a 100-mile house. We went up against 400 RCMP. We went up against the Joint Task Force 2. We had the command of a possibility of 1,000 military personnel that was ready to vamp on 35 of us Indians, mostly women and children, who were defending the whole question of unsurrendered Indian land in British Columbia here. And the fact that we were going on the basis that we had tried to go into these courts 42 times to deal with the whole question of title in unsurrendered Indian land, according to the 1763 Royal Proclamation, validating the rights to all indigenous peoples to maintain our lands unless, in fact, we decided we would sell that land to the Crown and or willfully surrender it. If not, then the Crown was intrinsically Indian title. Well, the jurisdiction issues were in our title. So we stood on that law. We tried to introduce that into the courts. We tried to introduce the 1704 Queen Anne's decision. The whole decision, Mohegan versus Connecticut. All this is detailed in the books. We even went back to the 1532 Papal Bull Sublimis Deus, which basically was the Vatican was recognizing title in unsurrendered Indian lands as a result of the very vicious policy of the 1497 Terra Nullius, which gave all imperial powers, all colonial powers, the right to divine right to invade, to claim, and claim title back to unsurrendered Indian lands. So all this said, we raised a resistance. We said we try to take this to court 42 times, and in the attempts to try to take it to court 42 times, the courts would not hear the issue, because if any of them had recognized that title, according to international and constitutional law, because under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, Canada recognizes and enshrines the rights of indigenous peoples, including those relative to the 1763 Royal Proclamation. So in other words, in black and white, and by the rule of law, it says we recognize your sovereignty and independence as indigenous people. But in the meantime, when it comes to practical reality, well, that's just what the books say. That's just what the papers say. And it's the same mentality that this Bush administration is saying, well, the Constitution is nothing but a piece of paper. People died for that people. Millions of people died. Blood was spilt for that piece of paper, those documents. And those laws that are built on national and international and constitutional levels are agreements between treaties between nations and peoples respecting one another's sovereignty. So, the young man who was a Rockefeller pays my way with my family. We travel to New York. We get to New York 2 weeks before 9/11. Put up in a hotel. And as we're inside that hotel, there's the Marriott Hotel. Happens to be one of the complexes of the World Trade Center. We stayed there for 10 days. We had a big, concert to promote this autobiography. Many people came out for it, the book signing. I was supposed to stay there until September the 13th. But I got a call from McGill University to come up and do a talk there. And so I cut that short, and I just was getting this very eerie feeling. I was somewhat deciding on September the 10th, we thought we might not check out and stay till the 11th and go to the top of the Twin Towers. Take my kids. From my hotel room, we could look out and see the top of the Twin Towers every night. And for some reason, there was this very dark, eerie presence around that Twin Towers. Something didn't feel right. Next morning, I said, no, let's pack up, let's get out of here. Something's not right. So we got the family. My wife felt the same way. We got in a van, we loaded up, and we headed out. Usually I was supposed to stop over at my sister's house before we went over to Montreal in Buffalo. But somehow I went up on the 95 New England Express instead of the 87 Deegan, and I ended up going right to Logan Airport, where these alleged Phantom Airlines were supposed, or these hijackers were supposed to be coordinating this attack for the next day. We passed there. We ended up, when I finally realized we made the mistake, we decide we're just going to go to Mohawk territory, stay at a friend of ours over there, and then just spend the night, or spend a couple days, go and do this gig at McGill University and head home. Next day, we heard about 9/11. Well, if we had been there, the building that we were in, that whole side would have been taken out. We could have died or been seriously injured, or my oldest son, Dylan, had pneumonia. Had we stuck there, all that asbestos contamination when those buildings came down could have easily killed him because he had double pneumonia already. We may not have gotten out of the region. We may have been stuck there. So from that point on, I went and did a talk at McGill University, and I told them at McGill University that I highly suspected that what happened at 9/11 automatically to me was an inside job. And I said the reason I felt it was an inside job, I said because I know the Rockefellers, I know the history of the Rockefellers, I know their connections to the Nazis, and I said I've studied them thoroughly inside out, and I said I also understand that David Rockefeller is the head of the Federal Reserve, but I also know because one of my brothers was a foreman in the Twin Towers. He ran one of the Mohawk crews. Many Mohawks were employed to come to the World Trade Centers to build build those Twin Towers because we're not afraid of heights. So they import us from Canada and the U.S. and the Canadian side, bringing Mohawks down to work on skyscrapers all around the world. We're known for this. So here we are. My brother's got running a crew there, and the name of the Twin Towers is they nicknamed it David Nelson Rockefeller. I happen to know that there was a big thing going on over the years, and it was kind of hush-hush, but if you read closely in the news, you'd find out that the Twin Towers had been condemned because they were contaminated with asbestos and many other different kinds of toxins, man, from light bulbs and all different kind of gadgets and computers that they had there. But basically, they were ordered to take the asbestos out of there, and basically what you had there was two white elephants. They did a study and found out that the Twin Towers, it would have cost them over $1 billion to set up scaffolding and start taking it down floor by floor by floor by floor. So I said, as one of the first people up at McGill University, as well as at Pacifica Station, I was on the airwaves with a guy by the name of Gustafsen Ghost Horse, who does a show every Thursday called Native Voices, First Voices. Anyways, I said, now you know what? If I was David Rockefeller, what would I do? If I had two buildings that were basically white elephants, and I wanted to get rid of them, what would I do? Well, first of all, what I would do is I would probably hire somebody to wire the place up with thermite and blow the things. Bring them down quick and fast. And then I would set up a goofy story about some guy in a cave with 19 Arabs. Some conspiratorial theory about some Arabs coming over and flying planes into these buildings. And that they just don't like our way of life. So we'll just get them, we'll fly them in, we'll blame it on the Arabs, and one, that gives us a presence into the Mideast. It gives us a justification to wage war in Afghanistan, to wage war in Iraq, and to wage war very soon, coming soon, in Iran. Why? Oh, conveniently, it happens to have vast amounts of gas as well as vast amounts, some of the largest deposits of oils in the world. But that's just a convenient aspect of the fact that we're counter-attacking those that attacked the Americans at the Twin Towers. Also, that white elephant, those asbestos-laced Twin Towers, it would be easy to then get somebody like Larry Silverstein to team up with a group called the Blackstone Group, who's run by a guy by the name of Peter Peterson, who used to be the head of the New York Federal Reserve, who is also on the Council of Foreign Relations, which is Rockefeller owned and controlled, to get Maurice Hank Greenberg, who has the American International Group, a big consortium of insurance companies, a multi-billionaires, to team up with Larry Silverstein and Rudy Giuliani, who happens to be one of my own political nemesis, to sit down and say, once we blow these buildings and blame them on the Arabs, but 6 weeks beforehand, we'll go and we'll try to broker a deal so that we can collect insurance on these things. And written into the insurance clause that was finally settled was that, yes, you can collect only if you're attacked by a terrorist. Oh, so coincidentally, Lucky Larry hit the jackpot 6 weeks before 9/11. That was a coincidence. And if you think it was orchestrated from inside as an inside job, you're nothing but a conspiratorial nut. Good. There's a bunch of nuts out here, and I'm a nut too. So then when I start digging, I said, you say, follow the money. Follow the money. Because in a capitalist society, that's what you do. You follow the money. You follow the money because that's all it is. It's money, money, resources, power, money, money, resources, power, power, money, money. Terrorists, power, money, terrorists, power, money, terrorists, power, money. 9/11, 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. We got to get rid of your constitutional rights. We got to take away your Patriot Act. We got to install the Patriot Act, number 1. Number 2, we got to make it safe for you against the boogeyman terrorists that are about to ready to take control of all of North America. We got to defend our borders. We got to stop all of these terrorists from doing us in. We got to stop them. We got to take their civil liberties and you're going to willfully give it to us. You're going to give it to us because we're going to protect you. Homeland Security's here for you, baby. And if you believe that, you're a nut. Good. Well, you're good nuts, and so am I. The reality is, I'm not looking in no cave for some knucklehead that was supposed to blow up these buildings. I'm looking in the enclaves of Wall Street for those that blew up those buildings. I'm looking at Nathan Rothschild. I'm looking at George Soros. I'm telling you about George Soros because he's an international point man and financier for Mr. Nathan Rothschild and Mr. Nelson and David Rockefeller. I'm telling you that George Soros was highly behind this. George Soros made billions and billions of dollars by defrauding the Bank of England, by defrauding the Bank of France, by helping Bill Clinton, getting Bill Clinton to invade the Balkans, overthrowing Milosevic, so-called defending against Albanian ethnic cleansing. It was a game. They wanted the resources in the tunes of trillions of dollars. They came up with another 9/11 BS story, and they invaded, and they're getting richer by the moment. George Soros made his billions of dollars on the hedge funds by starting hedge funds on Wall Street. He, in fact, does worldwide bets on short trades. The 9/11 Commission said, oh, yeah, there were companies, there were countries, there were corporations that benefited, that were benefited from the 9/11 put option stocks for short sales. Yeah, there's a list of them, 38, but the fact is, it doesn't really matter. Well, yes, it does matter, because that's why the National Security Agency, that's why the FBI, that's why the CIA, one of the beneficiaries of the put-option stocks was a guy by the name of Buzzy Krogard, the third in command of the CIA in the United States, made millions of dollars, put it in his pocket, and he also happens to be raking in millions of dollars as an advisor to Blackwater in Iraq. He's on the advisory board. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Greenberg, Mr. Silverstein, Mr. Giuliani, and a bunch of others. The Blackstone Group invested $111 million. Larry Silverman put up $16 million, and they bought the rights to those Twin Towers, the leases. If you go search deep enough, you will find out that the person who owns the majority stock in the Blackstone groups is a guy by the name of Mr. George Soros. I'm not looking for Osama bin Laden, because some of us have been had completely, and I refuse to look in that direction any longer for those that committed this act of mass murder at 9/11, and I refuse to believe that anybody but those who control the Federal Reserve were behind 9/11. I refuse to believe it, and as you can see, and as you can hear, I am saying it very loud for both sides of the border to hear what I'm saying there today. I refuse to believe that Elliot Spitzer, who was given 100,000 petitions by movie stars and structural engineers and people from all over the world demanding an investigation into 9/11, refused to investigate 9/11. Why? Because he's a friend of both Giuliani and he's a friend of both Jerry Hauser, who's the one that orchestrated the bogus anthrax and sent out letters and killed and threatened politicians if they didn't sign the Patriot Act, you're going to die. It was only Democrats that got it. He happened to be friends of them. Elliot Spitzer was also the one that acted amicus curiae and argued that lawsuit for Larry Silverstein and the Blackstone Group. Coincidence? No. Conspiracy? Yes. Yes. I'm not looking at it. So Spitzer decides he's going to go against Maurice Hank Greenberg. He's going to go up against them in the countrywide insurance scandals, on the subprime lending scandals going on, which Bush is involved. George Soros, by the way, was one of the guys that bailed out George Bush, the president of the United States, in his Harkin Energy. He bailed him out for that $1 million. Elliot Spitzer did not fall on his own gun, and that wasn't the scandal. The scandal was, we're showing you, buddy, if you decide you're going to go up against any of us in the empire, we're going to put you down. It's just that easier to get the media that we control. Every single aspect of the media in North America is controlled here nationally and worldwide. That we're telling you right here, if you try to raise any issue against those, we will raise the issues that we will smear a disinformation campaign and bring you right down. And that's what they did. They shut him up quick. One has to answer why, as the Manhattan District Attorney, why didn't he investigate? Well, we could sit here and we could talk forever. But I came just to deliver that message to say we have a job, and our job is to find out what really happened. There's 3,000 souls that died on 9/11 in 2001. Those souls are screaming for justice. Those souls know that's a lie. Those souls died in a catastrophe, a horrendous massacre. And those souls know that George Bush was behind it. Those souls know Dick Cheney was the maestro. Those souls know that the neoconservative agenda had already been laid out. Those souls may have even read the Project for a New American Century, and all the signers, all those signers of the neoconservative regime that signed They signed their death warrant by saying we need a new Pearl Harbor in order to justify our incursion into the Mideast. Let's wake up, brothers and sisters, because there's thousands of U.S. military men dead on a bogus, fraudulent war on terrorism. The war on terrorism that Dick Cheney says will never end in our lifetimes. They intend to continue the war on terrorism. The documents that were written on the war on terrorism right after 9/11 was written by yours truly, Mr. George Soros. And now let me tell you something else. If you're wondering why the anti-war movement in the United States and Canada will not talk to 9/11 truthers, it's because they get financed very heavily. MOVE organizations and answer organizations get financed very heavily by George Soros' foundations. And to implicate 9/11, to talk about 9/11 in law is a big no-no. And if you're wondering why Amy Goodman or Noam Chomsky or Noam Solomon or Chip Berlet and all these other so-called intellectual giants of our time and mouthpieces for the people aren't talking about 9/11, it's because they get their monies from the Ford Foundation, which is financed by the CIA and is also backed by George Soros. So if you want to know why they're not saying anything, because they'd rather have the money and shut their mouth than to have no money and speak the truth. That's who I am. That's why I'm here today, and we're talking to that independent media right there. We're talking to you. You're talking to me. We're going to make this thing happen. Today is independence for all those who believe, that justice for those who died in 9/11. Thank you.